Right, and we are good to go. Luke Chadwick, how are you? Welcome to the Rut.
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. It was funny how you're on Twitter. You said, "Oh, if you follow me, I'll follow you back." I think it was one Saturday, and so ever since it was May the 20th that your articles came out. I think it was on Sport Bible, where they analysed that tweet you said about your mental health going way back, and so I kind of picked up your story and I was like, oh, it'd be great to speak to Luke on the podcast. And then obviously I took my opportunity when you said, right, if you follow me, I'll follow you back one Saturday. And lo and behold, you follow me back, true to your word. And so I popped in your DMs. So yeah.
I'm always on the lookout for extra followers. I'll do anything.
Well, your Twitter's quite funny, actually. I mean, it's constantly taking the piss out of yourself, which I think is great.
I think my sort of jokes are running to an end now. It's starting to go a bit stale. I need to find some new material from somewhere.
Luke, thanks for joining me. I would love to talk about a few things on this podcast. Your time at Manchester United, your career, but also obviously the mental health battles that you've described, growing up at United and being of high profile, etc. Before we get into that, paint me a picture of Luke Chadwick growing up from Cambridge. Paint me a picture of what it was like being Luke growing up. Before you had your trials at United, was it at 14 you had trials at United?
Yeah, I went up to Man United at the age of 14 for a trial. Before that, I was playing for Arsenal in their centre of excellence. And before that, just playing sort of grassroots football for the local village team. I'm from a incredible, tiny little village in the south of Cambridge. Not all that much exciting happens there. Probably the biggest thing is the old church fair once a year. But I was an incredibly quiet, shy little lad. As a real young'un, I'd never liked going to school. When I started primary school, I used to cry my eyes out and hope that my mum would take me home, and it'd take me ages to get settled there. I was always quite happy when I was comfortable in my environment with new people. But before I was comfortable, I used to be incredibly shy in all situations, really. I think I started playing football for a team at the age of 8, for an under-9s team, for the local team, and I had incredible success because as a youngster I was freakishly fast. And back in my day, we started on a full-size football pitch with full-size goals. I used to be the striker, and my teammates used to whack the ball over the little defenders' heads, and I'd just chase after it and tap it in the big goal past the little goalkeeper. So I had incredible success as a footballer from an early age, and where the sort of the south of Cambridge isn't a hotbed for high quality football players, really, and I was a lot better than everyone else, or a lot faster anyway, so I scored an incredible amount of goals, which got me noticed. And I think...
Who did you support growing up?
I was a massive Cambridge United fan. They're my team.
They're your team.
I remember my first experience going to the Abbey Stadium to watch Cambridge play, and it absolutely blew my mind. I think I was about 7 years old, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So close to the players, in the crowd. The crowd was singing and shouting at the players, and the smell of the turf. It was just... I went out of that ground thinking, oh my God, that was incredible, because I'd never witnessed anything like it. There weren't really much football on the telly back when I was growing up. Just the FA Cup final usually was the only game on of the season. So to have seen that live football game, it just encapsulated me completely. And I was always on at my dad to take me back, and we started going all the time, which sort of coincided in probably the greatest ever Cambridge United team that were going through the leagues, and sort of seeing that success every week wanted me to go back and keep going. It was a wonderful time. I absolutely fell in love with football. I owe Cambridge United probably a debt of they're the reason that I fell in love with football so deeply at such an early age.
At what stage did you kind of realise that, or I appreciate that you were pretty young before you went to United and before you were in Arsenal Academy of Excellence. But at what kind of stage, can you pinpoint a stage where you were like, fuck, I'd love to play football for a living? Or was it, okay, actually, do you know what? I'd love to be an astronaut as well as go and play at the Theatre of Dreams or something.
That I don't ever remember thinking, like, as a real young kid, that I'm going to be a footballer, but I never sort of thought I was going to be anything else either. I used to,
right.
Every day I'd spend my mum used to have football pools stuck on the fridge. Right, I don't know if you will even know about them. You sort of guess the score, a bit like a coupon now.
No, I'm a bit younger than you.
Yeah, I thought that. I did think that. But I used to just get the football pools, look at all the fiction, just fantasise that I was playing for every team now. And I used to do that day in, day out. And you talk about visualisation now in sports psychology. Yeah. I was probably doing my visualisation from the age of about 9-10 years old every day.
Wow.
But I didn't obviously know that. I wasn't that
no, of course.
Just a kid to know what I was doing, but I could just see myself on the football pitch. And then probably from sort of secondary school years, I never, not in an arrogant way, but I just never had any doubt in my mind that I would be a professional football player. And I didn't have a huge amount of self-belief or anything like that, but I just assumed that what I was going to do. And again, that probably had a lot to do because I was a lot better than the other people in the area where I lived. And I probably just assumed because I was better than all them, I must end up being a football player.
Interesting. You go to the Arsenal Academy. I imagine that was a dream come true for a 10, 11-year-old kid walking into where was the academy?
So we used to train at Highbury. There used to be
it was Highbury.
Like a little indoor area that was just at the back of one of the stands at Highbury. So I used to go there. Again, I didn't, nothing to do with Arsenal. It was a fantastic football club, but I didn't enjoy it because I was so quiet and shy, and it took me so far out my comfort zone. And it was sort of either we got the train to Finsbury Park and then walked to Highbury, or my mum or dad drove me there. It just seemed like a bit of a hassle, really, when all I really wanted to do was play with my peers who I was completely comfortable with and do that. I used to make up the odd headache or tummy ache that saved me going over to Highbury on a Wednesday night because I just didn't really enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the social side of it, really. I was probably quite socially inept at that sort of age and just didn't...
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I was just so quiet. I just didn't like mixing, really. And I was confident and outgoing once I was comfortable, like with my mates at school and that sort of thing. But I didn't really like meeting other people. I was happy with the people I knew, really. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
That makes sense.
Probably the other people in my family, my brother, my mum, my dad were quite social people. So I don't know where it really came from, really.
It's amazing how the brain works, isn't it? As we're developing from the age of 3 or 4 through till mid to late teens, and how you develop this kind of mindset towards people based on past experiences. There's something clearly has happened, whether you remember it or not, that has triggered this almost enclosed nature within you. Quite protectionist, right?
Yeah, and I don't remember any specific moment or anything happened as a young child. But again, I remember quite distinctly that I never wanted to go to school. I had a really close relationship with my mum. My parents split up when I was about 7 or 8, but that was after I'd started school. But even from the age of 4 or 5, whenever you start school, I hated leaving my mum or my grandma if she dropped me off. I always wanted to just stay with them. So but I can't think of any specific thing of why I was like that, or if something happened before my school days.
You moved to United at 16. Talk to me about the moment where you received a phone call from, or how you were clearly picked up by United somehow.
Yeah, so I was, back in those days, you used to play for like your area team on a Saturday, then I'd play for us on a Sunday. So I'd play for the Cambridge schools team, which was all the the better players from around the schools around Cambridge. That was probably the more competitive football back when I was coming through. But I was scoring a lot of goals there, and a lot of professional clubs were watching me play. And Man United come and watch me play. A scout called Ray Medwell, God rest his soul, done so much for me. An incredible man.
Really?
He was the one that scouted me and took me up to my trial at Manchester, where we went up on I think it was 4 days over half term. Stayed in a hotel in Manchester, probably about 12, 14 other kids from around Britain that were perceived as talented kids that they might sign, and we were all there to train with the players that are already signed, and then see if we could get a schoolboy form that you'd sign at 40. You could sign from the age of 14 at the club, which would take you up to 16.
And I want to know about the moment where you're given this contract at United. Sir Alex, or whomever in the academy, has said, Luke Chadwick, you are good enough to play at this illustrious club, one of the biggest clubs in the world. That must have been an unbelievable feeling.
Oh, incredible. So I went up for the trial, and again, hugely excited, because after Cambridge, like the top team in the top league, the one that I followed was Man United, because obviously they won the league every year. And
of course,
I was a bit of a glory hunter, and I went up there, again, hugely excited, but with massive trepidations because sort of how I was socially. But it was like another world. I felt so at home straight away. The environment that I walked into, the way the staff made you feel, you're made to feel so important. Everyone seemed so happy to see you there. It was similar to going to my first game at Cambridge United. It just blew my mind, and I was made to feel so comfortable straight away with everyone else that I was, from probably the first day there, I was desperate to sign for the club, to do well enough that they'd want to sign me. And at the end of that week, it ended with a game against Nottingham Forest at Littleton Road. And before the game, we were all in the dressing room, and they introduced us to the manager, Sir Alex Ferguson. Come in, sort of shook our hands, introduced himself, said, "Oh, it's great to see you all here." Then he watched the game. After that game, we were driven back, to some of us to the airport if they lived in Ireland or whatever, then the rest of us to Manchester Piccadilly. Then I sat on the train for about 4.5 hours to get back to the village station where I live, and my mum picked me up from the station, and as soon as I got in the car, she said that Alex Ferguson had phoned her up that afternoon to ask her permission for me to sign for the club. And I thought, my immediate thought was she's pulling my leg, like she's having a laugh.
Yeah.
But when I found out it was true, there's only one. Once I heard that, I was so happy that I'd had the most extraordinary week of my life, really, in that environment at the club. And now that was where I was going to be signed for the next 2 seasons, or where it was, to see if I'd do well enough to get an offer to go on the YTS scheme.
And you walked into the academy, presumably at that stage. What are we now? 1997, 98?
It would have been 97 when I moved up there full time.
Right. So you must have walked into the kind of back end of the class of 92, right? Yeah,
so when I went up there, they were quite established first team players. They'd probably been in the team probably 3 or 4 seasons when I went up.
Okay, understood. Fine. You met your. I listened to. I don't know if you listened to as well, the High Performance podcast by Jake Humphrey.
Yeah, I've heard some of them.
Yeah. So listening to Phil Neville, Rio Ferdinand on there, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. There's a specific culture bred at United. Like, what was your insight into that culture when you walked into the first team dressing room? Because they talk about how relentless it was. It's always the next game. How it became very clear and obvious if someone didn't quite fit that culture. Now, clearly, you were there from 97 until 2004, 2005. So that's a good old stint there, albeit like on the periphery of the first team almost. Yeah.
I think even from signing at the club as a schoolboy and going through that process, you're reminded that every time you're representing the club, what an honour it is. You are expected to do everything right on and off the pitch. It's a privilege to play for the club, and you learn these values at the youngest ages coming through there. And obviously then you go into the full time as a scholar, and your standards are expected to raise even more in everything that you do. And then obviously in the first team, going into that, the training sessions, the standard was incredible, not just in terms of the skill and technique, the work rate of the players was absolutely every day. There was never an off day, and it was always having to push yourself to the limits just to sort of hang on to them and stay with them. It was, the professionalism was unbelievable, but at the same time,
Really?
a hugely supportive environment.
Right.
At the same time, it was
You,
incredible.
you literally walked into a dressing room in 1999, having made your first team debut with Giggs, Beckham, the Nevilles, Cantona, Scholes, Schmeichel. Like, was there intimidation? Were you intimidated by that environment?
I'm massively, hugely intimidated. Like when I first joined as a scholar, we all used to be at the cliff, so we were really close together in that environment. I was really uncomfortable, sort of around the big stars, as it were. Never wanting to really put myself out there. A lot of the other youth team players were always desperate to train with the first team, where again I was hoping I wouldn't train with the first team because I was
Really?
so comfortable training with my teammates. And like, again, that same sort of thing of being comfortable in the environment until I was really able to express myself, really. I probably trained with the first team a couple of times at the cliff and felt hugely out my depth, like leading up to the session. But as soon as I got on the pitch, then I was absolutely fine, because then I was doing that thing that I loved doing. It was just sort of the lead up to it made me feel extremely uncomfortable.
You were pretty much Beckham's backup, right?
I played on the right or the left wing, so it was either if Becks or Giggsy were tired, I'd get 10 minutes or so.
Really? I mean, you stepped into 1999, a treble-winning season. I mean, what's that even like? Because how many games did you play that season?
No, I didn't. I weren't part of that season. So the season when the team won the treble, I was a second-year scholar, so that I would have just still doing my YTS. So I would have trained with the team a couple of times that season, but other than that, didn't really have any involvement in the team, really.
But you were still in the team.
Still in terms of everyone was
Absolutely
made to feel together. I remember when we went, we all got taken to Barcelona to watch the final against Bayern Munich at the Nou Camp, but like every single member of staff was taken there on chartered flights from Manchester Airport, so everyone was there. That was the genius of Sir Alex Ferguson, was the way that he had everyone pulling in the same direction to get success. He treated everyone with so much respect, whether it was Roy Keane, the kit man, the dinner ladies. Everyone was made to feel part of that football club and part of doing their little bit to move the club forward.
So you were at the Nou Camp?
Yeah, we were there. All the youth team were there. We was probably a little bit worse for wear by the time that Ollie had scored the winning goal. But it was certainly a memorable evening.
What was that like?
Incredible. Like, just being there, it was such a poor game, really. Like, United never played particularly well, 1-0 down, but we was all sort of standing on the seats behind that goal where they scored the 2 goals in 3 minutes, and that it was just a feeling of pure euphoria, really. And again, even though I was a 18-year-old kid along with my teammates there, we all felt like we were part of it. We were part of what the club had achieved. And again, that was all down to the manager and how he brought people together and had everyone working as hard as they possibly could for the football club.
Phil Neville, and then much later Rio Ferdinand. Obviously, Phil Neville was before Rio Ferdinand, but they talk about this. It is a very specific culture at United, and it's bred by Sir Alex Ferguson. and you had a variety of different, genuinely world-class players pushing all at once. And it was a freak class of '92 that they built this title-winning team around for literally decades. You were a young kid, an outsider looking in, that broke into the first team. And what made that team so good?
I think it was a number of different things. Obviously, I talk about the culture a lot, this incredible culture that was built, the environment that was built. And I think that came from the young lads, the Becks, Gigs, all them boys that came through together, and it was such a tight-knit group. And then adding to that, the talismans that come in, like Eric Cantona, Roy Keane, them sort of people who they probably had the manager's complete trust to sort of lead by example. A lot of the times when I trained there, the coach, whether it's Steve McLaren was a coach, would take the training session, and the tempo would be through the roof, like everyone would be at it, and you think, my God, this is incredible. But then Sir Alex would walk out 20 minutes after the training session, and the people would turn around and just see him walking out. And this is 28-year-old, 30-year-old men, but they see the manager walking out, and it'd go up again. Just the sight of Sir Alex coming out would make these world-class players take it up to another level. It was amazing that just the sight of him walking down the steps at Carrington and walking across the pitch could make a training session just go even higher standard than what it was before. It all came from Sir Alex. All the success came from him, and then getting the right people in at the right time. When Roy Keane, I was there for the small amount of time, Roy Keane drove the standard so much every single day, and he was trusted to do that in the dressing room, at the training ground, knowing that Sir Alex would do the rest of it. It was incredible recruitment, incredible people, really, not just footballers. It was the standard of person that came in really made that dressing room and the success what it was.
You had from my perspective, and whether you were picking up on this at the time, I don't know, but you might be able to reflect back on it. You had this amazing opportunity to train and play in the first team, but also be slightly removed, I suppose, from that like those 11 players that go out week in, week out, because you were on the periphery of the first team. And so you were able to watch these incredible 11 players, you included, but also Sir Alex. What made him, Sir Alex, so one of the best managers in football history? Because he is one of a kind in one of a generation. And you actually listen to Phil Neville, for example, on Jake Humphrey's podcast, and he was talking about how they went for dinner just before COVID, and there was 6 of them in the car, 5 of them in the car, including Sir Alex. Sir Alex sits in the car, and they're all sweating, not knowing what to say. He still has that awe around it.
Yeah, I think it was the way that he'd treat everyone. If the one when I was at the club anyway, from the moment I met him as a 14-year-old boy, all you wanted to do was impress him. You wanted him to say well done to you. If he said well done, it'd make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And that was,
really?
It was small details that he'd go to. It was obviously an incredible football coach, but the man he was, he'd always be the first at training. He'd always be the last to leave, because he'd do everything he could to make the club what it was. I was at the club probably as a young professional in the canteen at Carrington, and there was under 10, under 11 academy boys there. And Sir Alex had come into the dressing room, big smile on his face, and know every single one of their names. He'd know every one of their parents' names and know a little detail about them, and just making people feel special. The fact that he phoned my mum up as a 14-year-old boy, 5 years later, I would have run through a brick wall for him, because he'd done that for me. It was just the relationships that he built with people, and everyone just wanted to work harder than they thought they ever possibly could for him and for that football club, because of what he'd built there and what the culture was. So I think the relationships he had with people was probably more important at the success of the club than the tactical nous that he had.
Mm. You played extensively with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, right? Could you ever see him going into being a manager when he was playing?
I never thought that. I think the ones that sort of when I was coming through, it was more of a sort of the lads that were shouting on the pitch, shouting in the dressing room, the ones that you assume are going to be the managers, the likes of Roy Keane, Gary Neville, who'd be real vocal. Ollie was always, like a lot of the players, well, all the players there, but probably a little bit more than most, of a hard worker, do everything he possibly could every day to get the most out of himself, whether that be off the pitch, in the gym, on the training ground with his finishing. He'd practice to make himself as good as he possibly could. I think he was always like an incredibly kind human being, always have time for people, always be polite, always talk to the players or the young players coming through. I think what he had a lot of was, and what is you can see now, is that sort of an emotional intelligence that probably wasn't required as much back in those days, where it's not so much as managing a team now, it's getting the best out of each individual. The game's changed a lot, and I think he showed that particularly last season with the likes of Martial and Pogba, two players that managers in the past have found it hard to get the best out of them. I think his relationship with them saw them playing some of the best football of their United career at times. So I think them softer skills, which Ollie's certainly got, are now much more in tune to management at the top level, where it might not just be shouting all the time at a group of players. It can be a little bit softer in how you deal with the individual people and getting the best out of them. So I think looking back now, you can see that them abilities that he had as a person will help him be a really successful manager.
The reason why I asked a little while ago about being quite, I suppose, insular is because you've talked a little bit now at the Open about insecurities growing up, the way you looked, name calling, or essentially bullying, anxiety when you were younger, not wanting to go out, always looking at people. What happened?
What happened in terms of at Manchester United in that?
I suppose whilst there's also one side of the story, which is when you join Manchester United, your exposure goes up astronomically, of course. But before that, I mean, I assume life wasn't all a bed of roses, or did it all just start at Manchester United?
I think there's obviously times at school, because my teeth sticked out, I had spots on my face where people would say stuff. But at the same time, I was incredibly popular because I was a kid that lived in a village that played for Manchester United. So it was obviously, if I did something to someone, they might say something to me and I'd say something back. Sometimes I'd be the one to say something to them and they might say something about my appearance back to me. It did, I don't know, it did make me feel, I obviously didn't like it. And I don't know if it made me feel more uncomfortable than maybe what I was saying to someone else. Because it did prey on my mind a little bit, the way that if someone talked about the way that I looked. So, and then when I left school, I thought, oh, that won't happen anymore now.
Yeah,
school
that's that done.
That's all done. And then again, occasionally someone would say something really, maybe in a dressing room, or we'd be having a bit of banter and that sort of thing. This is with people my own age, but again, I felt a little bit, I don't really like that, but not to the fact where I felt really bad about it. In my mind, I never felt that I looked that much different to anyone else, if you know what I mean. In my head, I thought, I don't know what they're talking about. I'm fine, and sort of
really
that. Yeah. So it weren't there was never any sort of self-loathing, or I'd look in the.
It's almost like there's no self-recognition that actually that's the kind of situation, which in many senses is very, very good.
Yeah, that's sort of, so no sort of disgust at seeing myself in a mirror or anything like that. But it did make me feel like, I wish you didn't say that. And then I moved out on loan in Royal Antwerp. and they I done really well out there, played really well. And there was one time where a massive big Belgian newspaper ran a big story on me because I was doing well. Took loads of photos, and it was all in Flemish, but I sort of read through it anyway. And there was one bit that I saw, and it said "denture a la Bugs Bunny," and that really cut me deep.
How did it make you feel?
It made me feel awful. It made me feel so shame. I was so ashamed of it. I was so embarrassed.
Really?
I wanted to, go and buy every copy of the newspaper and throw them away to make sure,
and burn them. Yeah.
to make sure nobody saw it. And I felt really low about that for like a couple of days. And while I was out in Belgium, real again, like embarrassed that other people. It was more what other people would feel about reading that about me and laughing at me.
Interesting.
That made me feel so bad about it. But obviously then that happened, and then went back to United. And
is that where the anxiety kind of stemmed from? Because you describe it as not wanting to go out.
Not the newspaper. Not that was so. I got over that quite quickly.
Right.
I forgot about it. But at the time, there was probably a couple of days where it made me feel like real low about everything, because more because other people had read it. It weren't one of them. Like I say that it made me feel bad at school, but that was probably they'd say something to me, or I'd say something horrible to them. They'd say something back. Then the bad feeling would be gone in 20 minutes or something. It would all be forgotten about. Then obviously this situation in Belgium probably lasted a couple of days where I felt, oh God. But then that all forgotten, went back to Man United, and then started playing in the first team there, really. And then that's where the other situation sort of stemmed from, getting into the first team and having a little bit more success at the club.
You talk about various different couple of TV programs that it was almost like they were picking on you, essentially, which is it must be difficult to watch and listen and basically be like, well, why are you doing this? But also you're kind of stood there on good money at Manchester United, or goodish money for a 19, 20-year-old, 21-year-old kid in a Manchester United jersey. Like, what was was there like a clash there in your own mind? Here I am as a United player versus the almost diminished self-worth I can imagine, having been bullied myself, that you must have felt on the receiving end of comments.
Yeah, I think like after the initial shock of it all, a lot of probably 80% of my anger was at myself for allowing myself to feel how I did. Like you mentioned there, how can I feel bad? I'm doing what I've always dreamed of doing. I'm playing for the biggest football club in the world, and then this sort of silly schoolboy name calling that's going on is making me feel like I don't want any of it. I don't want to be in the public eye. I don't want people to know who I am. I don't want people to laugh at me and say horrible things about me. So it was a lot of the
TV show. They think it's all over, right?
Yeah, that was a TV show. Yeah,
and that was like, and what were they saying?
Again, it was just around obviously the way that I looked. My teeth stuck out, spots on my face, and again, that's because it was such a schoolboy sort of thing. I didn't know how I was meant to feel about it. Was I meant to laugh along because it's funny, or am I meant to tell them that I'm not comfortable with this? But at the same time, again, because I was so quiet, shy, timid, I was never going to say anything to anyone. I was just going to keep it all bottled up inside. And I knew that. I knew that I weren't ever going to say anything at that time. So how do I deal with it? And then that made me angry at myself because I couldn't really deal with it because I didn't know how. I didn't know why I was feeling these things. I didn't know how to get over these feelings.
How did you internalize it?
In terms of
processing it, like, yeah, you say you're angry, but from what I understand from like reading the story is you didn't talk about it at all. So there must have been this internal, almost like resentment, the different emotions attached to all that at the time, because you're a young kid, right? Just breaking into the United first team, and it's incredibly unhelpful that you've got two team captains on a quiz show or a talk show calling you this beast and everything. It's
Yeah, a bit like all the way that I dealt with it is just thinking one day it'll stop. I did like just hoping and praying that it'd stop. Like I say, I didn't hate the people that were doing it or anything like that. I didn't like wish bad on them. I just wanted them to stop saying it, just stop mentioning my name and do whatever you've got to do, but without me involved in it, really. It was the first time I saw it again. It was similar feelings to what I felt when I saw the article in the Belgian newspaper, like a pure embarrassment, and just like in my head trying to think, oh, maybe no one's seen it this week, no one was watching, no one would notice that I was on it. But then it just kept going on a weekly basis. Every week it'd be on, and it'd make me like the feelings wouldn't get easier. It'd get worse and worse the way that I felt about it. It was such a relief when the series finished, because then I wouldn't have to sit through it anymore, because I couldn't stop myself watching it either. And then I'd just watch it up until a point, and even if it was sort of I'd seen myself on there 4 times, I'd still watch it on the 5th time, and again with that same hope and praying that they don't mention me tonight and it'll all be over. But then it was on there every week. It was so hard because I just couldn't deal with it, and I didn't know how to deal with it.
Okay, it's brutal.
Yeah, but then, like when I look back now, it was obviously a tough time, but that was just my life. So I don't know anything. Like, I don't know anything different, if you know what I mean. I was a young kid. I don't know. Perhaps this happens to all the young players coming out. What?
I don't think it does.
No, it does. No, I know that now. It definitely doesn't. It was. It goes, but from the age of 9, all I really done was football. So everything revolved around football. So football every weekend, play well, score goals, get signed by all these different clubs, end up going to Man United, and then never really thought about myself in any way away from football. As long as I was doing well at my football, I was happy, and that was my world, really. So now I'm in this situation at 19, 20 years old when it was, and I'm having to deal with something else that isn't football related, and I just haven't got a clue how, because all I know myself as is a young football player that's dedicated his life to be a footballer. But now I am a footballer. I've done what I wanted to do, but I feel terrible because of something completely different away from football. And although I was always in tune with other people's feelings, and seeing if someone was down, trying to make them feel better, in terms of myself, it was always just a case of just get on with it, just get on with it. But now, for the first time in my life, I was feeling that low that I didn't know how to get on with it.
How long were you feeling low for?
I probably uncomfortable until I left Man United. That was probably when I started getting easier within myself, sort of growing in confidence, being able to, obviously not under the spotlight at any other football club like you are at Manchester United, and just sort of enjoying all aspects of my life, not just being able to play football every day.
So how long are we talking? 4 years?
Yeah, so...
It's a long time. I'm not saying that in a bad way or judgmental, because this podcast is all about, like, when you listen to the intro of the podcast and you listen to my episode with Joe Bryan, like, it's where we have please leave all judgment at the door. But it's a long time to feel low, week in, week out, knowing that is weighing on your mind.
Yeah, I think there was other reasons around that. During that time when I was doing well, I signed a big contract that made me incredibly rich overnight, from a lad that didn't have much really growing up in the village where I lived, to now having loads of money, which I didn't really know how to deal with. Then off the back of the season where I won the league and was part of that squad suffered with injuries and sort of a real tough couple of years in that respect. And
what were the injuries?
Probably my pelvis and my hips, problems with air that resulted in surgery. And when I came back from that, the one thing that got me appearances at Manchester United, or my main strength that I had going back to when I was a kid, was I was incredibly fast. And when I lost a tiny bit of that, I didn't have enough to stay at a club like Manchester United or play at the top end of the game, which was never anything that made me, all I ever wanted to do was play football. Obviously, it was tough to hear that and get that honest appraisal. But again, there was that certain amount of relief of leaving Manchester United at that time. But I had huge guilt issues of earning a huge amount of money, but not being able to play because I weren't
Really?
fit. It made me feel awful, to the fact where I'd go in every day and get treatment, but I wouldn't want to spend time with anyone else at the football club because everyone thought I was a fraud. They didn't, but that was what was in my head now. And there was relief of not playing because I weren't in the public eye anymore. But all I ever wanted to do was play football. So obviously that was sort of clashing in my mind. But the big thing of guilt of earning good money but not earning it was a real struggle in my mind. And I just wanted to get my treatment and then go home, really. And then obviously when I got back fit again, I wasn't the player that I was that first season when I did get some joy on the pitch as well.
It's like you're plagued by imposter syndrome. The feeling of walking in every single day, not enjoying it because you don't think you've earned it, and you're on the operating table, and then you're on the physio table, and then you're on the bench, and then you've lost your pace or a little bit of your pace, and it's like, oh, I don't deserve to be here.
Yeah, there probably is a little bit of that around it, because I probably didn't, because once I didn't have that pace, I could see in training sessions in game that I weren't having a positive effect that I could do at times when I was sort of free in my movement and playing the way that I could play. So there probably was a period of, before I went on loan to Reading, of probably around 6 months when I got back from the injury, of thinking, what am I doing here, really?
How did that feel?
It was hard. I can't remember exactly how it felt in my head, but I remember that was a time when I'm thinking, I need to get away. I need to go and find my own journey. If I can see it, I mean, the players are going to see it. The manager must be able to see it. I'm just not of a level anymore to play at this standard at this football club, which is obviously tough.
That's difficult though, because this is Manchester United, the biggest football club in the world, and knowing that you're not quite there at the moment is really, especially as you've talked about, not quite being able to talk about, articulate, rationalize, whatever you want to call it, your feelings, your internal emotions, and how you're going to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that was a time when I was more attuned to how I was feeling. I think the period that I had off for the long period when I was injured and I weren't playing, obviously it was really tough, but I really obviously spent a lot of time at home and thought about how I was feeling and why do I feel like this. And I think that's when I realised that I weren't at a level to play for Man United anymore, and I don't really want to stay here. I want to just go and play football and have a quiet life, really. Be a footballer at some level, but be able to not feel under the microscope all the time because I'm playing for the biggest club in the world.
Off the back of the TV show that was pretty relentless in terms of its, I would say, bullying of you, did you get much on the terraces, the stands? Did you kind of take that in? Like, did that kickstart any abuse?
Yeah, I think that was probably, I don't know, it might be unfair to say that started. Perhaps I don't remember it before the TV show, but perhaps there was some, perhaps because of the way that although I thought I looked all right, there was probably 10,000 people on the terraces that probably thought I didn't. And
Right.
part and parcel of the game. There was times on the pitch where I'd receive abuse from the fans, from the terraces, because of the way I looked. But I don't think
that's also part and parcel of football, right?
That didn't affect me as much, because although a lot of it shouldn't be said to her, I wouldn't go into a football stadium and verbally abuse a 20-year-old boy because of the way he looked. Yeah. But that's like, this is football makes
personal preference, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, football does change people. I'm sure there's lovely people out of a football environment that wouldn't say anything like the things they say to players when they're on the pitch. But it didn't bother me as much, really, because that's what I loved doing. So I could put it to the back of my mind, because football was always the release of what I'd wanted to do. There was a few occasions where coming out of the ground and walking to the bus where people would say the most awful things to me, and that probably
really
affected me a lot.
Like what?
Sorry?
Like what?
Again, just sort of the way that I looked, but calling me the C, like, just purely because I played for Manchester United. I think I like to think they didn't know me personally and thought that's what I was like. And it's strange, really, because obviously a few feet that way was the stadium, where I didn't feel too bad about it. But then just stepping out of the stadium and walking along to get on the bus, it would affect me so much more.
Were your teammates aware of this? Did you have any conversations at the time with anybody about this?
No, and I never would have. The person I was at the time, I didn't ever speak to anyone about it. I didn't speak to my girlfriend, I didn't speak to my mum, my dad. I just never mentioned it to anyone. And if anyone flagged it up to me, I'd just sort of smile and say, I don't mind, it's fine. Because I didn't think there was anything I could do about it anyway. So and if I always thought, if I was always more worried about how other people felt than I felt myself. So I thought, if I tell them I'm fine, that'll make them happy. So that's what matters, really. As long as they're fine about it, I'll just have to sort myself out and make myself fine. Really.
Yeah. You left United in what, 2005?
I left in 2005, but I'd probably on loans from 2003. So I went to Reading and then Burnley for a season-long loan. So I think from the time I went on loan to Reading, I knew that my time at United was over. It was now around trying to find a different pathway for me, really.
And interestingly, you talk about the relief after you left United and you moved to lower category clubs, but West Ham United is still a big club that you moved to. Like, what was the relief versus being, it sounds like your time at United was was full of various different parts mentally. And, from my perspective, as if I was overviewing our conversation, it sounds like it was tarnished by what happened. I don't know whether you feel like that.
To be honest, when I look back, I absolutely love my time at United, in terms of I signed there at 14 and had all, like, the time as a schoolboy, the time as apprentice, the time on loan in Antwerp. The time that was tarnished was probably off the pitch when I started doing quite well on the pitch. That's when I struggled with myself. But in my mind, Manchester United done so much for me in terms of the lessons that I learned there, regardless of football, them life lessons that you're brought up with at Manchester United, which, like, in my mind is turned me into the person that I am today. Is them early lessons I learned at the football club. I don't look back there with any sort of regret or anger. Obviously, I went through a real tough time there mentally at times, but that's part of football. It happens sometimes. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't look back there with any regret. I have, like, the memories of Manchester United are hugely positive. It's
extraordinary, I imagine, yeah.
Away, like, Manchester United had no control or couldn't deal with what was happening away from there. So in terms of being in at the club while I was fit, that was always my release, was the football, to play football and forget about the stuff that's going on off it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does. It's fascinating, actually. When you retired, you joined Football Fun Factory, which is what is the business that you're a director of now?
So it's just an organisation around football being fun. It's for kids between 2 to 12 years, and it's not a development program. We're not linked with professional football clubs or trying to do that. We're an organisation for boys and girls of all ability, and it's just around making football fun and trying to fester that love for the game at such an early age, and having really positive experiences when you come into football. It's using football as a vehicle to develop positive life skills like teamwork, communication, sportsmanship, and we'll celebrate them behaviours more than someone scoring 20 goals in a session or anything like that. So it's a really rewarding role and something that I'm thoroughly enjoying being involved in at the moment.
It's really nice to hear. When we had Joe Bryan on the podcast, we were talking about mentorship. We're talking about mental health within football. I mean, you're almost the perfect person to talk about this from a professional perspective, but also like a youth perspective. There's going to be parents listening to this, as there were the Joe Bryan episode in football, who will be like, my child is playing football, but he's reserved, or I think he's struggling a bit with how he sees himself. He might be being bullied, etc. What advice do you give to parents? I imagine probably on a weekly basis about how to improve mental health within young footballers, because it's something that you've got direct experience in.
I think the key to is learning that, or trying to teach that emotional intelligence at earlier ages, and sort of trying to spark conversation where the young people will talk about how they're feeling. Like I mentioned, football is a huge bubble that you're in, and it encapsulates your whole life. I only was not trapped in that bubble. I loved being in that bubble, but when you come out of it, it's so hard because I've not learnt them communication skills while I was playing. It was always just about football. And I think at younger ages, if you can connect with children and talk about how they're feeling, and that they've got to understand that there's more to life than just football. There has to be other avenues to get away from the game and do other things, because I think that's the problem. That's why people leave the game at 18, 19 with really poor mental health, because in their mind, there's nothing else. There's nothing else for them apart from football. And that was my attitude at leaving the game at 34. Like, where do I fit in this world now? I've just lost everything to me. And it wasn't until I learned about being more emotional, being more vulnerable and talking about my feelings that I realised there's loads of other avenues open to you. There's loads of other things you can do, both if football stops or while you're still playing football. So I think a big concern for me now is it's all just football, just how that nothing's changed in that respect. Children are going in, and if football finishes, they don't know what else they could possibly do. So I think it's an educational tool of learning there's other things in life. And even at the younger ages, there has to be more emphasis at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old around your emotional intelligence, around learning why you're feeling really happy today or why you're feeling really sad the next day, of how you can deal with that and how you can stay. We all know that everyone's got mental health. We've all got it 24 hours a day, and it's around trying to keep it on an even keel, and not when it dips low, how can we get it back up to normal as quickly as possible, using positive ways of doing that around opening up about your feelings, talking about why you feel a certain way. But I think it's that vulnerability that is sort of frowned upon, and it's feared because we won't talk. But it's such a powerful tool that, particularly in football, it was not going to take away from your performance. It could add to your performance in football as well, but more importantly, your life in general.
How was your transition away from football? Because I actually didn't ask about that. You briefly touched on it there. I've had a lot of professional sports people on this podcast now, rugby players, cricketers, footballers, and there is always this sense of loss when they leave professional sport. So I always describe it as throughout your career, you're told what to eat, where to piss, and where to shit, and then when it all like when it all goes, you're like, what on earth do I do next? Did you have the same sense of loss? Like, what was your transition like?
Yeah, it was incredibly hard. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with was
Really?
football finish. I never planned for football to finish. It was sort of ended for me, so I didn't get another contract, and the feelings of loss are huge. When I was when I was like turned 30 and people think, oh, your football career's like might come to end, I used to muck about and joke with my missus and kids saying, oh, I'll be quite happy when it's over. I'll just be like Jim Royal off the Royal Family. I'll just sit there, watch telly, drink beer, get fat. That's what I'm looking forward to doing. But obviously when it happens, it's such a huge transition. And I can't imagine that anyone goes through it that smoothly because of how it is. There's nothing's ever really going to replace being a professional footballer or a professional sportsman, because it's the best job in the world. And I'd not planned for it at all. Went down the coaching route, got all my coaching qualifications, went and worked at a professional club in the academy thinking that'd be the dream job, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like getting
Why?
up. I didn't think I was helping. I didn't think I was benefiting the players. I didn't think enough of the players really wanted to be there. I thought it was just a case of they could do this for a few years and they're a professional football player. There weren't enough smiles. I didn't think people were there for the destination. They weren't truly enjoying the journey, regardless of where it ends up. I remember my thoughts when first playing football as a 8-9-year-old kid, and it was, I don't remember one bit of tactical or technical advice that I got, but I remember just running around with a big smile on my face because I love doing it. And I think that's why I feel so rewarded in the work that I do now with the Football Fun Factory. It's because I'm just not, it's like, I don't know, if it's like losing a loved one, football stopping. And I never admitted that it was over. Always thought the phone might ring again from
Really?
a manager on the other end of it, or I might get another deal. There was opportunities to carry on my career, but it would have meant leaving home again that I didn't want to do, and just sort of floated through 2-3 years of things weren't great at home, grumpy all the time, drinking too much, and just didn't know
Were you suffering from depression? It sounds like
possibly, potentially, yeah, I think I probably was. But again, it's that sort of cognitive dissonance where you refuse to admit you're wrong about everything. I would never admit that I was wrong. And then I probably just sat down one day and just broke down in tears and just cried. And like, I didn't feel bad about that. I just felt like it helped enormously. I felt cleansed, and it was something I'd never really ever in my life allowed myself to do. And just allowing that vulnerability that's probably changed my life and made me a hugely positive person back that I was when I was playing football, because I'd just come away from that because I just didn't know what's the point of being around anymore, because all that I was giving the world was football, and a lot of the time that weren't particularly good football either. But like, that was all that I offered. And now again, that was just a lack of education, of just being in a bubble of football for 20 odd years and not learning other skills and not taking the opportunity to learn about myself and why I feel a certain way.
That's fascinating. What do you think you could have done differently?
I haven't got any real regrets in my football career. Don't get me wrong, I weren't an incredible football player, but I had a wonderful, varied journey with loads of ups. Obviously, talked about loads of the downs as well. When I signed for Man United at 14 years old, from that moment on, I completely down tools at school and just thought, why do I need to do that anymore? So I think the only regret I've got is sort of the education of not doing my lessons, not learning something. Obviously, the amount of free time that I had as a football player, I could have educated myself a lot more in them dead hours that you have in the afternoons and that sort of thing. But I think in terms of if I could do anything differently, it would have been from the age of 10, 11 of thinking about the way that I felt at certain times and allowing that vulnerability throughout my whole life, not just when I finish playing football, because it all just comes out in one sort of instant when I break down.
Okay, a hypothetical situation, right? I'm a kid, not far off it. I'm 10 or 11, and I've come to you as my football coach, Luke, and there's something just not right about me. Like, what would you do? Because this is almost like a bit of a masterclass for coaches, parents out there who might see, or teachers who might see kids who they think are struggling, but often aren't quite sure how to, what's the word I'm looking for as well? How to almost push them to speak.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that you can do in a one-off conversation. I think there's a massive quote I think on the youth modules that we've done with the coaching, where they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I think, again, going back to the lessons learned from Sir Alex Ferguson, it's around building a relationship and understanding the young person that you're talking to and getting a real good flavour of what they're all about. If they've obviously been usually really happy, but now they're really down, is understanding. But it's not that easy, is it? I mean, I sent the tweet out or I said, talk about your problem, but me saying that, anyone saying that, it doesn't mean that people are going to do it. It's around sort of being comfortable, being able to do that. And the more that you to do something, like anything, the more comfortable you become. So I think if you have early conversation with a young person, it doesn't have to be about problems, but it's around making someone comfortable to be able to talk to you about their feelings, which is a long, huge process, isn't it? It's not something that's going to happen over the back of two conversations. So I think it's just making people feel as comfortable as possible, and then having them lessons. I don't know, like in schools, could there be more around mental health and being emotionally intelligent and understanding your feelings? Don't get me wrong, I know they've got enough on as it is, but it's so important. It's probably the most important lessons human beings are ever going to learn.
You're absolutely right. It's like when I went to school, and likewise with you, like I started learning about Pythagoras' theorem, and I've never once used that since I was 14 years old. I was never ever taught about mental health. I was never taught about the importance of being emotional, being vulnerable, and talking. We seem to have got it all wrong.
Yeah, obviously they need these core lessons. It's just finding the time in a day, because I dare I say it, learning about yourself is...
Go on, I dare you.
Learning about yourself is probably a more important lesson than German or French. It's not, it's like, obviously these things are important, but there's nothing more important than yourself, is there?
100%.
You have to know about yourself. You've got to love yourself to allow yourself to love others properly. So I think there's more that could be done, but will it be done?
You've been on this particular journey, right? And it sounds like after you left football, you were almost forced to go on this journey of exploration, right? And although that might sound quite airy-fairy and blue sky at the moment, let's just build out around that, because I get a lot of people talk to me, having listened to the podcast, being like, that was insanely helpful because I actually learned practical things that somebody did to move away from their rut. And it sounds like you were in this position for 2 years after leaving football, where it's almost like this sense of loss, grief. What on earth do I do next? So what were the steps that you took? Obviously, you broke down in tears, but then what happened to move away from this place where you could actually then explore who you were, and what did you explore?
I think that the breaking down was probably the biggest thing, something that had to happen, just to allow that grief, and for me to just draw a line under football. It's been incredible. You've done what you love to do, but that's over now. Now it's time to, you're still young, to the next chapter of your life, to do something else. And from that moment on, I found myself more comfortable, not to start with, obviously, talking to people about how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling like this, and explaining about breaking down and understanding what a good thing that was. But then I just felt so happy when I stepped away from professional football as well. I just felt like that journey of my life was over now in terms of professional football, and I was doing something completely different. It really helped a lot getting involved with the Football Fun Factory, something that I was hugely passionate about, of making football fun for young children. And I said earlier about it being so hard of replicating professional football, but this gave me real feeling that growing something and making it as good as possible. But in terms of, as a footballer, football was everything. But now this was something I loved doing. It was a passion, but I have other things that I was doing as well at the same time. So it was having that balance in my life that I'd never really had before, of time to spend time with loved ones, time when I worked, and time when I could spend a bit of time on myself and learning more about myself and what makes me feel good, and why, when I'm feeling low, you don't have to feel low for 2 weeks and just sort of grin and bear it. You can talk about why you're feeling low and say it, and then I feel a lot better within 2 days, or the next day I feel much better. I think the biggest thing I could say is that the power of allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing that in your life, because even now, with that sort of, particularly amongst men, with that macho sort of feel, that it's not as bad as it used to be 20 years ago, but it's still there, and people just won't allow themselves that time to be vulnerable, that they don't get the best out of their lives and what they're doing, because they're not experiencing that. And just allowing yourself, you can't be the one that is strong all the time, because no one is. You've got to allow yourself that other time, and it gives you the opportunity to learn about yourself and to improve that emotional intelligence, which can really drive you on to the next level in all aspects of your life, just in terms of relationships, the job that you're doing, everything that you do can be improved by being emotionally intelligent.
What did you learn about Luke Chadwick?
I learned that Luke Chadwick, the non-footballer, was a lot more interesting than the footballer. Really? I like him better because I've got more time to myself. I can spend more time on myself and spend more time with my loved ones more. And it makes me understand that football was great, but it is such a bubble, and it probably did take away some humours. My personal development was taken away by football, and that's completely my responsibility. That's not blaming football because of that. It is my responsibility. But now I can see where footballing just took over my whole life, and I could do things to change that now.
You're going into various mentoring. You're going to be mentoring footballers soon. What specifically are you going to advise them around doing? Like, what impact do you think you could have on footballers?
Well, to be honest, I want to. First of all, it's my responsibility to build relationships with these footballers. I can't just expect to go in and people to talk to me or anything like that. All I want to do is help them, not just as a footballer, but in all aspects of their life. And obviously, I've got experience of going through the ups and downs in football, of coming through as a young player at a big football club, and just talk to them about how that affected me, and I can be completely honest about that. My goal is for them to be comfortable enough with me to be completely honest with me, so we can have maybe difficult conversations or really honest conversations that I refuse to have coming through at their age. Because I'd like to think if I did have that, and I could have opened up, I could have dealt with situations that I went through a lot more effectively.
Mm, that's interesting. Really interesting. Social media. Do you think you would have been on social media when you were at United?
No, definitely not. To be honest, I've never really been into social media. I've never really set up profiles or anything like that. When I did like get set up all the profiles when I started to help with the Football Fun Factory, that's what it was all about. But in terms of being on it back then I don't think there's no way in the world that I would have got involved in that.
What's been your experience of it so far?
Incredible. Like, I was sort of, when the guy said like, this is what we do, we set up on social media, I was expecting like a lot of negativity for some reason. That's probably just a pessimist attitude towards social media in general. But the experience I've had with it has been fantastic. Obviously, you get the odd comment here and there, but the positivity around the things that I've said, obviously a lot of terrible jokes as well that have got a lot more likes and whatnot than I thought they'd get. But in terms of me as a person and the stuff that I put out there, the response has been in general really positive.
Really? That's nice. I've got 5 questions for you. Yep. Which I didn't tell you about, but they're, I'd like to get your answers for them. Everybody who comes on, and if you listen to the Joe Bryan episode, you might know them. But number 1, what's your favourite book and why?
Favourite book that is a tough one. I'd probably say Matthew Syed, Black Box Thinking.
I've heard that's really good.
Yeah, and that talks a huge amount about what I've mentioned earlier, the cognitive dissonance, and how people just don't admit, even when it's glaringly obvious that someone's wrong, they can't admit that they're wrong. And I think I learned so much from that in terms of, that was me. I suffered from that so much, and always being right. And it was, to everyone else, it was glaringly obvious that I was wrong. And again, being vulnerable and allowing yourself to be wrong and admitting you're wrong can be incredibly cleansing to the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Number 2, what lesson have you learned in your life that you know is true, but you kind of hate?
Oh God, that is a tough question.
Do you know what? 99% of people, I think I've only had one person who's been like, bang, this is it. Everybody is a bit stumped by that one.
Say it again.
What lesson have you learned in your life that you know is true, but you kind of hate?
I think what I'd say was, when I started coaching, and I was obviously coaching children how to play football, on the side of the pitch, I can't stop myself having sort of an arrogance and ego about me in terms of moaning at the referees or saying something to the coach who's coaching the other team who might have said something that I disagree with. And I can't.
Is that because you, as Luke Chadwick, ex-United, ex-professional footballer, that kind of ego taking over?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. But I hate that about me. And I just, every time that I've done it, I just can't stop myself doing it. And I don't like to think that I'm egotistical or arrogant. But when I hear myself say stuff on the side of the pitch, which I wouldn't do at any other time, really, that's what I sound like. That's probably something that I can't stand.
Interesting. So what lesson is that?
Don't be an arsehole.
Yeah, fair. Your friend who's having a tough time at the moment picks up the phone, rings you and says he's having a really, really bad day today. What do you say?
I think that conversation is just trying to get them to talk. So it's sort of leading questions. You're not putting your opinion across to them. I think sometimes when we're talking to someone who's feeling low, we can offer too many opinions of your experiences or how you dealt with that, because everyone deals with situations differently. So I think it's around just trying to get my friend to speak as much as he possibly can, because I'm pretty sure if he does get it all off his chest and talks about it, he's going to feel better about the situation after he's got it off his chest.
Makes sense. I like that. Number 4, when you're struggling with something, struggling yourself, what do you go to? What's your turn to improve things?
I think first of all, admitting it to myself and saying that there's no point shutting this away. I feel this certain way, and then talking to someone that I trust about the situation and saying, just getting it off my chest. And I don't think it's ever it's not really a case of saying, what would you do? What would you do? It's just me sort of getting things out there and just saying them. And when you say it out loud, you can sort of feel it coming off your shoulders as you say it, and sort of losing a bit of stress around it, and talking about it as long as I can, whether it be 2 days, 3 days, the next day, until I'm feeling better about the situation, until I'm feeling positive about the situation.
I like that. So it's so, do you know what? This podcast is born out of my inability to talk about my issues when I was suffering from depression and anxiety. Still do. The amount of people who start with talking is just unbelievable. Like, I know we're going slightly off topic with the questions, but why is talking so cathartic for you?
I think it's just the relief of when you're feeling low and and letting someone else know about it. Because I think that's what it all is, just sort of, you keep it stuck inside you, and when you do, it just gets worse and worse, and the problem in your mind gets worse and worse. It's like your mind's ready to explode until you can sort of communicate that to another human being, whether they give you good advice or not. Well, sometimes you don't even need the person to say anything. You just want to vent your frustration and talk about what your problems are.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. I love understanding why, for so many different people, talking has such different impacts, because it does have quite different impacts on people. It's an amazing tool, but people don't do it enough, especially men. I mean, us men, we're terrible at it.
I think it's a case of making it a habit, because it's so hard and awkward the first time, isn't it? And you don't know, it's hard to express yourself how you want to express yourself. I think, like anything else, you keep trying to do it or make a point, or in the diary every week there's a time where you're going to talk about how you're feeling. And hope a lot of the weeks, I'm sure that's going to be, I'm feeling great, and this is why I'm feeling great. But then on them odd occasions where I'm feeling really low today because such and such, it's just practicing doing something, making good habits part of your routine.
I really like that. Putting a date in the diary every single week to talk. I do something on Instagram, but you'll need to follow me on Instagram after this. Called my weekly mental health check-in, and admittedly I haven't done it for 2 weeks now, but where I talk about what the hell has been going on in my mind in that week and what I've been working on. Partly because I quite like putting it out there, because a lot of people be like, wow, bloody hell, that's been a strange week for you. But yeah, it's my weekly my weekly session to get things off my chest, albeit on social media. Of course, my other half here's the other shit that goes on week in, week out.
Yeah, and I think that what works best for you, and that's a great way of expressing yourself to a wider audience, as well as helping yourself. You're helping a lot of other people as well who see that and think that's a good idea. So let's
hope. Number 5, last question. You're lying on your deathbed looking back at your life. What are you most proud of?
I think it's the person that I was. Hopefully I can say that in 50 years time or whenever I die. I think all the achievements or whatever I did, I think they'd probably be not forgotten about. There'd still be memories, but I think it's more around how you were as a person, how you were to to your loved ones, your fans, your friends, your family. And I think that is more important than any achievement that you won a football league or got a medal for some reason or another. I think it's how you were. What good did you bring the world in terms of were you a good person? I think if I can look myself in the mirror just before I pop me clogs, I'll be an happy man.
I like that. I like that. Luke, it's been an amazing hour and a half. Can't thank you enough.
It's flown by.
I know. Thank you for coming on and being so open about it. I'm hoping we didn't go into anything that you didn't particularly want to go into, but I think it's just, from my perspective, it's fascinating exploring the mindset of a professional footballer who's been in such a high performance, high professional environment like that United team, and then how you transitioned away. And I think everybody goes through those from a professional sports angle. Everybody seemingly goes through this really difficult transition period. And then actually how you forced yourself to explore why do you feel so shit and what on earth is going on in your mind is wonderful. So thank you for talking about it.
No worries. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, mate.
No worries, James.